Welcome back to Learn German in 32 Hours with John Berlin. In the last lesson, we had looked at genders in the German language and we had used the article to understand the different gender of masculine, feminine, and neutral, as well as plural with der, die, das, die. Now, we'll be moving forward in today's lesson and we'll be talking about the most important grammar tables that we need to understand in order to move forward. So, we'll be talking about personal pronouns, possessive pronouns, and articles. Now, personal pronouns could be put like in first person, singular, I, second person, singular, you, third person, singular, he, she, it. Then again, first person, plural, we, second person, plural, you all, and third person, plural, they. Yes, I, you, he, she, it, we, you, all, they. Yes, and for each personal pronoun, there is a respective possessive pronoun. For example, I is my, you is your, he, she, it is his, her, its, we becomes our, you all is yours, and they is their, right? And we'll also be talking about articles like the definite article, indefinite article, and negative article. For example, Germany is the best country. Berlin is a city in Germany. Germany is no Asian country. Germany is a European country. Yes. So these were the examples for the articles. Now, to get started with these three important grammar tables, there is a requirement, a prerequisite. And the requirement is we first need to look into the three cases of the German language. Yes. Once we have understood this important concept of cases in German, we'll be ready to get started with our grammar tables. Now, what is a case? Let's find out. Now, talking about case in a layman's language, let's call it the identification of subject and objects in a sentence. So each sentence in whichever language always has subject and objects. In German, to identify them, we categorize them in cases. So the first case in German is known as nominative case. Second case in German is called accusative case. And the third one is known as dative case. Perfect. So what do we call a case in German? It's actually known as Kasus. That's right, instead, Kasus. So the first case we'll be talking about today is called nominative Kasus. Yes. In English, you could simply call it the subject. Yes. So every language has a subject who does the action. So how can we find the subject in a sentence? Now, it's easy to find out because you could simply look at a sentence and the subject is always there with the verb. Yes, but still, if we want to find it out technically, we could ask ourselves the two questions. For example, who or what? A person who does an action, or a thing what does an action. For example, John visits Mark. So the simple question is, who visits Mark? Answer is John. Or let's say, who invites John? Mark. Yes. So either ways, it's easy to find. It's the word which is written with a verb. Yes. Or you could ask the questions who, or even you could say what. For example, what works slow? The computer works slow. Or what runs fast? The watch runs fast. Yes. So either ways, who or what can help you identify the subject in any sentence. Yes. So that is what your nominative case is. Very simple, isn't it? All you need to do is find out the subject. Perfect. That brings us to the second case, which we call accusative. Now, accusative is basically the person or the thing that is receiving the action. If there is an action, a person doing an action, there also needs to be a thing or person receiving it. So we call it the direct object. To identify it in any sentence, you need to look at the sentence and ask the question whom and what. For example, a person whom action happens, or a thing what receives action. Yes. So please remember, the what here is different from the what we did in nominative. In nominative, the what was doing the action, In accusative, the what is receiving the action, right? Okay, for example, John visits a friend. Whom does John visit? The answer is a friend. Yes? Okay, Mark invites a friend. Whom does Mark invite? The answer is a friend. Sam bakes a cake. What does Sam bake? It's a cake. Yes? So if you look at it optically, at the right side of the verb, you'll find the object. On the left side of the verb, you'll mostly find the subject. Yes? So if you remember the question for the subjects, what were they? If you remember, they were who and what, like we did previously. So if you ask who visits a friend, the answer is John. Who invites a friend? The answer is Mark. Who bakes a cake? The answer is Sam. So on the left side of the verb is your subject. On the right side of the verb, you'll find your object. Yes? Perfect. Now, up till here, German and English go hand in hand. In English, also, you'll find a subject and a direct object like nominative, accusative. In German as well, you'll find, of course, the nominative, accusative. Yes? Now, moving forward, we find another case in German, which is known as the indirect object. Now, in English, you call it indirect. In German, you call it dative. Now, this doesn't exist in English as a case. I'll show it to you in a second. First, let's find out how to find an indirect object. So an indirect object could be found out with the question to whom and for whom. As you can see, to whom and for whom always point towards a person. Yes, it's always talking about a person, not a thing. Yes. So for example, Sam bakes a cake for John. Yes. So we could ask, for whom does Sam bake a cake? The answer is for John. Perfect. Or Sam gives a cake to John. We could say, to whom does Sam give a cake? The answer is to John. In both cases, you saw it's always a person. To whom, for whom. Previously, we had seen accusative could be a person, could be a thing. Nominative could be a person, could be a thing. But dative is always and always a person. And it's to whom or for whom. Now, I'll talk more about why it's an indirect object. Let me bring it to the next page and I'll talk to you more about why do we call it indirect object. Before we go into why it's indirect, let's first recollect what we learned. We had learned Sam bakes a cake. Sam is like who bakes a cake and who we had learned is the subject. And in German, we call it the nominative case. Perfect. Then we had learned what does Sam bake? Like a cake. So cake is receiving the action. What? It's the direct object. And in German, we call it the accusative case. Perfect. Let's write accusative. And finally, for whom does Sam bake a cake? It's for whom. It's the indirect object. And in German, we call it dative. Yes. Now your question is, why is cake a direct object and why is for John an indirect object? Now, for example, if you look at the action is baking. Yeah, to bake. The action to bake first happens to the cake directly. That's why it's the direct object. And only after that, it happens indirectly for John. Yes, so that's why it's indirect object. So that's the logic behind why it's direct and why it's indirect. Baking is directly happening for the cake and indirectly for John. Yes, that's the logic. And I'll give you a trivia as well. In a sentence, you will find if there is an indirect object, there will always be a direct object. Because the logic says for something to be indirect, first of all, there should be something which is direct. So in other words, you could say that indirect cannot exist without direct object. And now let's replace the words with German. What is an indirect object? It's like dative cannot exist without direct object. What is direct object? Accusative. Yes, dative cannot exist without accusative. So you always need a accusative when you're having dative. Yes, perfect. So this was a little bit about the three cases and their questions. We could recollect it a little once again with a little example as well. So first, let's look at the nominative case. Let's bring it down to a new page. We have learned nominative is the subject. The questions are who and what. Yeah. To give you an example, let me write, for example, let's say any question which begins with who. For example, who bakes or who baked the cake? Yes. Now we could answer it in first person, second person, and third person. For example, I baked the cake, or maybe you baked the cake, or maybe he, she, or it baked the cake, or maybe we baked the cake, or maybe you all baked the cake, or maybe they baked the cake. Yes. So all these pronouns, I, you, he, she, it, we, you, all, they, are the pronouns for the subject. Yes. And they are all nominative. Yes. We will be learning these pronouns in German as well. Perfect. I, you, he, she, it, we, you, all, they. Perfect. Similarly, we could come to accusative. Let's take it to a new page. All right. And let's look at the accusative case. It basically means the direct object. And we have learned the questions are whom and what. Yes, a person whom action happens, or a thing what receives action. So let's make a question with whom. For example, let's say, whom does John invite to the party? Yes, whom does John invite to the party? Now we could answer it in first, second, and third person. So let's say John invites me to the party, John invites you to the party, John invites him, her, and it to the party, and John also invites us to the party, and he also invites you all to the party, and he also invites them to the party. Yes. So me, you, him, her, it, us, you all, and them are the pronouns for the direct object. Yes, they are accusative. And we'll be learning them in German as well, right? So we'll be learning me, you, him, her, it, us, you all, and them in German. Perfect. So up till here, you'll see that English and German are going hand in hand. All these pronouns are there in English. We are just learning them in German. Yeah, perfect. Now moving forward, this brings us to dative. And we'll bring it onto a new page. And we have learned it's an indirect object because the action is happening indirectly to it. We have learned it's a person. We've always learned the indirect object cannot exist without a direct object. All these things we have learned. Now a practical example. Let's make a question. Let's choose one of these to make a question. Let's make it with to whom. So let's say to whom did John give the cake? To whom did John give the cake? So let's answer it systematically in first person, second person, and third person. So we could say John gave the cake to me, or he gave the cake to you, or he gave the cake to him, or to it. Yes. Or we could say he gave the cake to us, he gave the cake to you all, and he gave the cake to them. Right? Now you can clearly see to me, to you, to him, to her, to it, to us, to you all, to them are not single word pronouns. They exist in form of to, which is a preposition, and me, which is a pronoun. So it's a combination of two words. At least that's how it is in English. Yes, so in English, we can safely say that the indirect object does not exist as one pronoun. It is made up with a preposition and another word. Yes, another pronoun. In German, you'll find, howsoever, we have a particular pronoun assigned for this pronoun. Yes, that means in German, there'll be an extra pronoun which will be taking place for to me, to you, to him, to her, to it, etc. Yes, so we'll be looking at all of these pronouns in the next few lessons, and we'll be learning them in German systematically. So thanks for joining me today, and get back for the next lesson where we'll begin practicing these personal pronouns and seeing how do they look like in German. Perfect.